So welcome to Aesthetic Meets Function, how to use logic to achieve natural results. As I said, this is very near and dear to my heart because it is a webinar that was born out of frustration and then out of realization. Okay, so as a beginner, when I was in college, I was given advice by one of my professors to practice, practice, practice. Okay, I came up to him and specifically asked, what is the difference between a good technician and an excellent one? So what's that secret sauce to help me become better, to be one of the best, hopefully, in my field one day? His advice is legitimate. You have to practice, but it was very vague. I had no idea what I needed to practice, where I needed to start. And so 10 years later, I took a course by one of my all-time favorite teachers, Mariano Morizzi. Okay, I went on to practice for those 10 years, but they were the wrong things, so they hindered my growth. I studied things, but I studied things that did not progress my career. So when I attended Mariano's course, he insisted not only on giving instructions, but making sure his students really understand why he is doing what he is doing. And he kept repeating the same phrase, it's not logical, it's not logical. And in that moment, something clicked in my head where I realized that I am doing things simply because I was told to do them. I am not doing things and coming at cases from a point of logic where I sit down and really think things through. Why am I putting yellow where I'm putting it? Why am I putting orange where I'm putting it? It was kind of one of those things where I was just being told what to do and I did it. And if you asked me why, I didn't have a logical response. So that's why I wanted to make this webinar, to kind of change your perspective a little bit and to also give direction of where to start. So this is kind of a small slide of things I kind of wish my professor had told me at the time. Where do I start? That knowledge gap. So you need to start from the fundamentals. And there's many to choose from, but these are the ones that I found were most important in my own personal growth. You have to know basics, the basics of color and how it affects your restoration, the basics of anatomy and morphology, and also viewing each crown from a three-dimensional perspective. You have to also know texture and light and how they play a role in the natural effect of your crown, how texture plays a role on light and vice versa. You have to know the fundamentals of dental photography, because I'm a big, big believer that in order to progress, you have to record your process. Okay, you have to also observe your mistakes, know where you went wrong, and know where you need to fix it for that next patient, that next crown, to always be progressing and getting better. Something I'm going to discuss later in the slides is also staying grounded in reality, and that pertains mostly to social media and comparing yourself to others on social media, your reality with their highlight reel. Okay, so that is a practice that you need to incorporate, staying grounded in reality. You also have to understand your demographic, and you have to understand your patient. You have to understand your doctor, their needs, their wants, and that will really help you in producing results that are actually needed, not just from your artistic view. And finally, you practice and you experiment. And a big mistake that I made throughout my career is not understanding my material, what I'm working with, the differences, the translucency, the color, the opacity. You have to practice and experiment using your stains and your porcelain and how each one affects the result. So I'm going to go straight into, there's 4 lessons, a lot of slides that we need to get through, so I'll try to power through them. The first lesson is to, as Pablo Picasso once famously said, learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. That goes into the first lesson, that it is not logical to expect a masterpiece when you haven't even learned the basics. What I mean by this, the basics of color, something that is incredibly important when you're starting out your journey in this field. Okay, so there are three fundamentals of color and color theory. We have hue, so it's the color of an object. It is how you distinguish one family of color from the other. It's how you distinguish your yellow from your red, from your purple to your green. In dentistry, hue is commonly categorized into A, B, C, D families, and also L, M, and R families when you're finding a shade for that patient. Also, kind of a tip that I learned way later that I needed to. L, M, and R, the way you kind of are able to distinguish the three colors, or to find kind of like similar how skin tones have an underlying color, like pink or yellow or neutral. The L, M, and R also do. So L, you can kind of remember it for lemon. It is a more of a yellow undertone, a yellow hue. M, you can remember it for mandarin. It's more of an orange tone and an orange hue. And R is raspberry. So your more red tone teeth would most likely fall under the R category. Okay. So moving on from hue, we have chroma. And chroma is the intensity or saturation of any given color. It's how much dye is in that color. Okay? So from that picture that we see for chroma, we see that red. And the more red we add, the lower value the color becomes. It still stays red. It's still the same hue. That doesn't change. But chroma and value are related. As chroma increases, the value decreases. And like I said, the hue stays the same. And moving on to value, the value is also known as brightness or luminosity, and it's the amount of white in any given hue. So it is grayscale, how much white or how much black is in that specific hue. In dentistry, it's a little more complicated because it also is how much translucency is in your color. So the higher the translucency, the lower the value. The lower the chroma, the higher the value. So when you're looking at the value of your tooth and you're saying it's a little bit too low value, when you're stacking porcelain, for example, and you see that your crown comes out lower value than you want, a little bit more gray, you probably added too much translucency. You probably put on way too much enamel or clear, and that's what's giving you that grayness in your crown. So adjusting hue, you can adjust it by value. And a question I often get asked is, why do stain kits even have black? There are no black teeth, at least not in nature, and even the darkest stains are not black. But I found that black and white stains are hands down the most useful shades in your palette, because you can change any hue by changing its value. So when you add white, you brighten the hue and you create a higher value color. When you add black, it does the opposite. It darkens the hue and it creates a lower value color. So your stain kit will come with let's say 14 different shades, but those shades can create a variety of different shades, which is great for customization for your patient. So I'm just showing a little video here that I made to illustrate that point. So in the middle, we have ESO 9, ESO 6, and ES 11. Those are the shades in the VITA Accent Plus kit. On the left-hand side, I added more white. I wrote 50%. Usually when I'm mixing white, I mix more white than black. If you add too much black, it's going to create a very dark, low value color that's not natural. On the right, I mix those colors with about 25% black. So I usually will add more white than black. So you can see in the middle the original shade and how it transformed by adding those whites and blacks. It's great, great, great for customization because no patient is the same and no patient is going to have a generic color. You will need to mix your colors. And you can also do this not just with white and black, but you can mix orange with yellow. You can mix gray with blue. It's something that I often see lacking is the mixing of shades rather than just using what is given to you in the kit. So this is another video of just illustrating my point. Before I play the video, the stains here are mixed in a very kind of like liquid form. in your kit, they should never be really this wet because that's how you get kind of runny shades and shades mixing together. It's just I did this for visual purposes because it is not fun to watch dry shades being mixed together. It's a mess. So this is the end result. You'll see the original blue and then the lower value and higher value shades next to it. Also, we were experiencing some lag this morning, so this will be up on the YouTube channel, or you can message me through my Instagram handle and I could send these videos as well, sans lag. And this is just a slide showing my most used effect shades. I use effect shades more often than I use body shades or dentin type of shades. Because I use those mixes of white and black to either soften or kind of harshen that color. The white on the top, the lighter colors like the cream, the yellow, the orange, I'll usually mix with white. Whereas like from brown down to those reds, those blues and purples, I'll usually mix with a little bit of black to give it a deeper hue. So moving on to our next lesson. To acquire knowledge, one must study. But to acquire wisdom, one must observe. It is the difference from learning from a book to learning from real life. Okay? It is not logical to ignore nature when you are trying to mimic it. And what I mean by that, to mimic and produce natural looking restorations, we must spend time observing natural teeth, whether it's via Instagram or real life patient interactions in the clinic, in the lab, even through photographs of that the doctor sends you. All patients and their teeth are unique, but with that being said, you will recognize similarities across various dentitions. It's pattern recognition. And that pattern recognition will help you reproduce nature. So if there's anything to take from this, make it your mission to observe and study rather than just doing as you're told. So I'm going to play another video here for you of my staining technique. So I'll be showing some quick videos in this lesson. The technique in this staining video is simple and uses my own experience of looking at teeth and recognizing patterns to reproduce a natural result. I know we're all very busy in the lab, so these are kind of small adjustments to make in your work, in your daily workflow, to enhance the aesthetics of your crown.
When staining, I find myself starting at the incisal third most often, though this is not a rule. I start from dark colors and work my way to light ones, with white always being last. I like to limit how much blue I use, so I usually stain blue only at the mesial and distal incisal corners, pulling the color slightly down the line angles. To create the illusion of depth, I will create a window below the incisal edge. I like to mix ES13 with ES14 to create a deeper, richer gray. Using a thin stain brush, I float the shade along the edge, breaking up the straight line as I go. Once the darker incisal shades are complete, I will move on to the body stain. Here I am mixing ES05 with ES04 to create a softer, more manageable, warm orange shade. I will layer the color along the margin and gingival third, lightly feathering the color up toward the middle third, which will create a natural gradient effect. I like to layer the color in the interproximal to create a deeper shade to mimic more stain in that area. I will use that same orange or a lighter yellow shade to break up the incisal window and create contrast with the cool gray and warm yellow. I like to use a pink shade as a transition color between the patient's tissue and the margin of the clinical crown. This gives the restoration more warmth in that area and mimics pink tissue mirroring off of the crown's reflective enamel surface. I will often use the same pink shade in the middle third of the crown, which will give the illusion of warmth and underlying blood flow in that area. Next, I am mixing ESO6 with ESO1 to create a softer shade of brown to place in the interproximal area, which creates the illusion of shadows and stains and will make for a narrower looking restoration. You can also opt to mix brown and black to create a darker, deeper shade for a more stained appearance. Finally, I will move on to the lighter shades. At this stage, halos, mamelons, decalcification, and white crack lines are created. For this crown, I loaded ESO1 on the tip of my brush and, with a blotting motion, applied it along the middle third of the crown to create decalcification spots. Always float the color on with a light hand, rather than dragging or pushing the color around, which will create streaks. Using ESO2, I floated the color along the incisal edge, right above the translucent window, and applied some ESO3, pulling the color down into the gray tone to further break up the straight lines and create fine crack lines. And here is the final result. This is a generally simple procedure, but using the logic behind hue, value, chroma, and contrast, it makes for a realistic three-dimensional result.
Just realized the mic was muted. Perfect. These are the results before bake with no glaze. I really encourage you to do your stain and glaze bake separately to avoid any running of your stains. So I do that with the fixation bake, and you guys can take any screenshots you like. This is my personal bake, so you make adjustments based on whatever furnace you have. So the fixation bake was recommended to me after I expressed how frustrated I was with all my stains mixing and my glaze running. I also noticed porcelain slumping slightly when I baked multiple times at a higher glaze program. So I started doing fixation bakes to affix the stains onto the core before glazing. And I know it's one extra bake, you don't want to hear that, but it is only 9 minutes. So it's also a really low temperature. So it's a low risk of your material slumping, distorting, or cracking. And it provides additional stability and control to your routine. It's also great when custom staining when the patient's in the chair because you can add and remove color very easily at this stage. You can see in that picture there, it's like very dry. So it's much easier to remove it when it's at this stage than when that color is underneath glaze, when it's already, the glaze is baked over like a protective layer. Okay. And on the left there, that's what the fixation bake looked like for this specific crown. And I know that looks a little bit alarming because it's so white and dry, but if you just put some glaze liquid or glaze in general, it will reveal the color underneath. And at that point, you can make any sort of adjustments you need to the color. You can add or you can remove very easily. This is super helpful when you're custom staining and that patient's in a chair and you don't want to be doing like 6 different bakes at 15 minutes each. And you can see all the colors stayed exactly where I put them. So next I'm going to move on to the glazed texture bake. Now I'm going to warn you with this temperature, it's for monolithic restorations, meaning no porcelain. I'm saying this because at 780, like I use a low fusing porcelain, I use the Lumix AC. And I bake it at about 760, 765 degrees. So at 780, at 15 to 20 degrees higher than what I bake my porcelain, it will slump. It will lose all of its sharpness. It will lose all the texture that I made. So this is for monolithic. If you want to use this exact same technique for porcelain layered crowns, you can do so. Just make sure that the glaze program is like 5 to 8 degrees lower than your porcelain bake, your last porcelain bake.
When creating texture, I prefer to spend more time adding glaze or porcelain to the surface of the restoration rather than trimming it. I'll mix glaze powder with a powder liquid until it is a thick, honey-like consistency. I'll use a slightly larger brush size, such as a number 2 or 3, to pick up a ball of glaze, and I'll place it along the middle third of the crown. From there, I will wipe the excess off my brush and start spreading the mixture upwards, thinning it out as I go. Using a smaller glaze brush, anywhere from a size 0 to 1, I'll create horizontal lines along the middle third. With a little bit of glaze liquid on the tip of my brush, I will smooth out the area along the margin and on the mesial and distal ridges to create a smooth, reflective surface. This will mimic the more worn spots of the tooth surface. You'll see me removing some of the glaze thickness as I create texture, since I added too much. Nothing wrong with making adjustments as you work. Using the same thin stain brush, I will add some glaze in vertical lines along the incisal third. You can also wipe your brush and, with the very tip, create a line from the middle to incisal third, which will create a divot in the crown's surface. It's a great trick when creating the illusion of deep crack lines. The irregular surface texture will catch the light and add a realistic and three-dimensional look to your crown's stained surface that a smooth restoration may lack. With that being said, the texture you create should copy the patient's existing dentition, especially when creating a single central. Morphology should always be created with harmony in mind.
Okay, so as every presentation goes, I realize there might be some audio or video problems. Again, just send me a message. I will send you these videos and you can practice on your own. So we're going to get through one more.
During the glaze stage, I'll make small adjustments, such as closing loose contacts, creating sharp mesial incisal corners, or even adding a little bit of length along the incisal edge, using the same thick glaze mixture I used to create texture. If larger adjustments are required, I will mix corrective porcelain powders with glaze liquid to create a thick, sticky mixture and apply where needed.
Okay, as the video said, any sort of adjustments that I make, I used to often make them with porcelain, but I've been making them a lot more often with that thick glaze. It's a lot easier to trim and to adjust, and it doesn't slump. So this is the final result of that same crown that I was showing. Okay, I'm going to move on to some stain tips and tricks. My number one tip is to always record your results through a map. As you can see here on the left side, it's my micro layering, and on the right side is the stains that I used to achieve this result. The case went really well, so I know in the future if the patient comes back and she wants any sort of other lowers done, I can do that and actually refer back to my notes. So the first rule or tip, there are no straight lines in nature. Okay. Mother Nature is chaotic. So if your crack lines are looking a little fake, it might be because they're too straight. So making the lines curve will add that natural effect. Secondly, adding texture with glaze or porcelain is easier than trimming it. So I noticed that when over trimming my crowns, the porcelain would lose some of its color. besides my hands and wrists screaming for help, I also noticed that a lot of my effort was wasted because the amount or the moment I do a stain or glaze bake, the concavities I created would be filled with liquid, and the bake itself would make the surface very smooth. Adding texture with a thick glaze or with porcelain saved me a lot of time, as well as saved my wrist from carpal tunnel. So I have another video here of just how thick I usually mix my texture. You can see it like stretching. This texture, this honey-like thick texture, makes it really easy to manipulate. So another tip is to use transition colors to create a natural gradient. As you can see in this crown and also in my staining video, I went from the darker brown at the at the margin and at the gingival third, and you can see in this crown how it transitions from brown to orange to yellow to like a white cream, and then that middle incisal part was actually just the patient's natural stain, but that transition, that gradient, is what creates a natural effect. Another tip, use contrast to create a visually striking result. So that dark brown at the pits that I stain there with that white decalcification, it's very striking. It's very vibrant. So that adds a natural effect. As well as on that central, I did a similar technique, and you can see that kind of brown crack line curves. It's not straight, it curves a little bit. So it also adds a natural effect. My next tip is to always create highlights on the ridges and shadows in the interproximals. This is a basic rule of light reflection, where light will reflect off of convex surfaces and will create shadows in concave surfaces. Those shadows will also make for a narrower looking restoration, and it'll mimic stains, whereas the lighter, brighter convex surfaces will mimic tooth wear and a smooth surface. So here, dark gray tones give the effect of depth and translucency in the incisal. I prefer to use gray tones at the incisal in comparison to blue or violet. Similar to water, the deeper it is, the darker the color. Blue and violet shades give the impression that the depth of that translucency is shallower, whereas a darker gray gives the optical illusion that the area is deeper. Not all halos are white or cream colored. This is super important because I noticed that on every crown, I used to do just white or cream halos. It's not logical. It is not natural to always have a light halo. This is a real patient. I did her veneers a little while ago. I'll be posting those results soon. You can see one of her centrals is a lot more discolored than the other one. So that darker central has kind of like an orangey, warm color at the incisal, whereas the lighter, whiter tooth that she has there, it has that white cream halo. It's not a rule, of course, like I said, nature is chaotic, but just remember to observe the patient's other teeth and to copy that, because mimicking is what is important. Don't just do cream because you were told to do cream. This is a mistake I used to do all the time and I see very often online. Incisal translucency is below the incisal edge, not right along it. So it's a question I get asked all the time as well, how to create a natural looking incisal window. What I notice is that many will stain right at the incisal edge and avoid halos altogether. The way to create natural translucency or mamelons is to stain your desired incisal shade a little below the edge. And this is also a patient I did her central recently. It was a young woman that got into a fight, and obviously you can see trauma there. So I also recorded this map to make sure if any other fights occur, I will be doing her other central. But here you can see that incisal window, and you can see those mamelons very clearly. And you can also see that cream colored halo, which is a similar shade to the rest of her, or incisal third of her tooth. So this is just a recap of everything I talked about in case you guys want this for your notes. And we're going to move on to lesson 3. Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. That is the third lesson, that it is not logical to expect future progression without recording past results. So some of the most brilliant minds in history recorded their findings for themselves, for their students, and for the future generations. So without Leonardo da Vinci, we wouldn't have the Vitruvian Man, a study of human proportions. We also would lose some of the first ever notes of dental anatomy. Without Plato, we would not have 25 books on philosophy, nor the modern university. And Thomas Edison, as controversial as he was for his discoveries, was a businessman and inventor that recorded over 1,000 patents in the US alone and over 2,300 if you include his foreign patents. So the common similarities between all of these great minds is that they recorded their results, they recorded their progress. How do we do that in dental? We have photography. So as I said, recording your process is observing your progress. So this is a crown I did recently. It was an implant retained cut back crown. And I went step by step. And I'm able to see that if I make a mistake, I kind of already know what step I made that mistake at. I'll know if I need to strip the crown completely and start over, or whether I can just remove some stains should I need to. So those custom adjustments, I'll know where I went wrong, and I'll know where to improve for that next patient. I'm going to run through photography quite quickly because this is not a photography course and I could probably talk about it all day long, but I'm going to go over some of the basic equipment and the basic terms with you today. So basic terms you need to know, and I really recommend you do your research on, is exposure. So it's the amount of light that enters your lens. Your shutter speed is how the amount of time your sensor is open to receiving that light. Your depth of field, it relates to which subjects are in and out of focus. Your white balance is the quality of light in your environment and it's very important for you to buy also a white balance card. It's like a gray card and you make your settings with your camera to change your environment, the light in your environment, or how your camera perceives that light in your environment. Your aperture is the adjustable opening that controls how much light enters your sensor, and your f-stop is how that opening is modified. Finally, your ISO controls how sensitive your camera is to light. So I highly, highly recommend the book Lit by Miguel A. Ortiz. His Instagram is up there as well. Give him a follow, take a look. His Instagram is a great source for education. And this book actually helped me improve my own photography. And what you see on my Instagram probably in the last 6 months has been thanks to his notes. So I also highly recommend these 2 Instagram pages. We have dentist.camera. He goes into specifics of photography, of your camera, of equipment, how to improve. And then we have Noel Perkins. He's artistic.dental. He's a really, really nice guy and really great at what he does. His page is more about artistic photography. And after every photo, he also puts a page showing what his f-stop was, what his ISO was, the exposure, everything. So you can kind of follow along and copy and practice your own dental photography. So this is the equipment I personally use and kind of like a starter kit when it comes to dental photography with a professional camera. So I have the camera there. It's a DSLR. Macro lens, it's 35 millimeter macro. That just means I have to lean really close into the patient or into that subject in order to get those macros. A lot of people use the 100 millimeter lens, and personally, I'm not the biggest fan of it. So 35 millimeter is what I use. You need a tripod, a flash. I use the Canon Macro Twin Light. I really like the versatility and the adjustability of having lights on either side rather than a ring flash, which concentrates all of that light onto the subject, like right in the middle. It also often, when you have a very glazed crown, will create like a light donut right in the middle of that crown. So you also need diffusers for your lights and a background. I use a black Bristol board that I got from the dollar store. That's my black background that you see online. So I understand that this equipment is not cheap. It's quite an investment. I find it is an investment in your future and in your progression as a technician, but there are always budget options. So you don't need a Manfrotto tripod. You can, an Amazon Basics tripod. I've used it for years. It's great. It's like 30 bucks online. Those are Canadian dollars. So I also found a 30 millimeter macro lens. It's by Olympus. It's a few $100s less than the Canon one that I use here. The flash diffuser, both mine in my last slide and this one are from Amazon. This one is just kind of more of a budget-friendly one at about $15. And the Godox, I wish I knew about this before I bought my my Canon stuff. So the Godox Macro Twin Flash is great quality. It's comparable to the Canon, just in a obviously budget-friendly way. Also, the flash bracket is it's like a fraction of the cost of the Photomed one that I have. Now, I'm not mad. The Photomed is a great quality, but the Godox is comparable and it is a fraction of the cost. So you can definitely get amazing results without having to break the bank. Now you'll see that I don't have a camera here. Cameras are expensive no matter what you buy. My Canon is actually a entry level, like the cheapest DSLR you can get in the Canon lineup. I got it years and years ago. It was what I could afford, but it's served me very well. Also, I really recommend if you go get a camera to get something with Bluetooth connection, because it will save you a whole lot of headache when you are transferring photos to just directly through Bluetooth transfer to your phone rather than having to transfer it into your computer and then into your phone. So the camera you could find through Facebook Marketplace, Kijiji, Craigslist, whatever secondhand place you want to look, and you can get a very good quality camera, again, for a fraction of the cost. And if you don't want to invest even in the budget friendly, you have your smartphone. There are no excuses there. Everyone has a smartphone, and obviously the cameras are excellent. The zoom is excellent. There are no excuses. There's no mercy in this dojo. Always record your results, because it will make you progress as a technician, as a person, in general, as a professional. So these are my settings straight off of my camera. It shows my ISO, my f-stop, my shutter speed, everything that I used. So I actually adjust slightly based on where I am. So if I go to a doctor's office that does not have the best lighting, I will adjust those brackets and also the settings of my camera to try to get a good shot. Because I use a 35 millimeter macro lens and I lean really close into the patient, I do apologize always for invading their personal space. But sometimes the flash is too bright or the settings are too low, in which case you can always put those photos onto your phone via Bluetooth and then change just the exposure so that you get the result that you saw in life. So you can see that in the lab and intraoral, both are using the exact same settings. So that canine there, you can see it in the patient's mouth. So these are just some recent cases, some smiles that are restored thanks to VITA. I'm using here YZST zirconia. It's cut back and it's porcelain layered with Lumix. So these are just some of the cases. And then these are lithium disilicate cases, also porcelain micro layered. Now I'm going to move into understanding your demographic, what I was telling you at the beginning of this presentation. You have to understand when to go natural and age appropriate because not every case will require your keen eye for detail. Uh, these are two completely polar opposite patients. On the left, we have a young woman, about 19 years old, who was going to college. She's a tomboy. She loves, playing sports. I think she got a scholarship for sports. And in general, her personality was very, I would say, almost low maintenance. She was very chill, very nice girl. Didn't really care. Her only concern was that she didn't want people to know she has crowns. She's 19. She wanted to blend in. She didn't want anyone to point out, like, why are you missing teeth? So even though she has a lot of decalcification, most likely from ortho, she asked me to put that in. She said, I want them to blend, and that's what I did for her. On the right, we have an older gentleman. We have a central and a lateral there that I did. And he, again, did not have any plans to whiten, to bleach, to zoom, to do any sort of veneers. He wanted natural. He just wanted to smile again and have his teeth back. So that's what I did for him. So this is one aspect of understanding your demographic, when to go natural. And then you have to know your demographic of when to go a little more artificial. This young woman, the opposite of the young woman in the other slide, she was a little more high maintenance. Very nice girl. I had a chat with her, and sometimes the patient says one thing but wants another. So she said she wants natural. She wants her teeth to blend. But after kind of understanding her and talking to her and understanding my demographic, which I understand not every technician can do because not everyone sees the patient, but it's a good idea to get at least some information from your doctor. She said she wants natural, that she doesn't want them to look like veneers. But after talking to her and hearing more about her and what she's looking for and what all her friends have, I understood that most likely she's looking for something a little more artificial, but more of a Hollywood white smile. So you'll see in this picture, I actually ended up doing 2 sets just to, I kind of had a bet with my dad, who's 40 years in this field, and he's also my boss. I work closely with him. So we had kind of like a little bet where I said, no, she told me she wants natural. I don't know. And he was saying, most likely just knowing your demographic, you have to use your logic, understand that most likely she's going to want something whiter with less detail, with less staining, with no incisal translucency, none of that. So I ended up doing 2 sets for this patient. On the right, I used a very translucent ambria material. Added a little bit of incisal staining. It's very hard to see, but there's some blues in there, and there's like that white halo. And in this photo, I don't know how well you can see it, but definitely in real life, it exactly matched her lower teeth. Like, it was the exact same color. On the left, in the left photo, I used a more opacious lithium disilicate material. You can see there's no translucency, it's white, there's no stains involved, nothing like that. So we put both of them in, and it's not enough even to understand your demographic. You have to trust your intuition. So in the end, she said she wants natural. What she received and what she chose was the more white, opacious material. And there's nothing wrong with that. It is a personal preference, but again, understanding your demographic, or if I had understood my demographic a little better, I would have known not to do 2 sets. I would have saved myself all of those hours, but it was a good learning experience. This next patient, this case was the bane of my existence. The rule here is that every patient is unique, so keep your opinions to yourself. It's another aspect of knowing your demographic. This patient, really, really sweet guy, but he did seem to have some sort of complex where he was obsessed with white teeth, and like toilet bowl white didn't even cover it. So we showed him 0M1, which is like a very bleach, like the most bleach you can get. And he's like, why is it yellow? So we understood with the doctor at that point. We sat down and we had a long meeting where he said, Danny, I know what you want to do. You want to give him natural, but we have to respect the patient's requests. He wants white. Keep your opinion to yourself. We're going to give him exactly what he wants. These are monolithic high opacity veneers. HO0. There is absolutely no translucency here. There's no staining here. It is white. Funny enough, they weren't white enough for him. He ended up coming with the doctor to my lab, and we stained some ESO1, which is the whitest of whites, on top of that surface. So this is a high opacity ingot with white stain. When I say that I cried, that my heart was just ripping apart because like, this is not, I wanted to give this guy natural. I wanted him to smile and people, not to say what nice crowns or veneers you have, but what nice teeth you have. That's the goal of every technician. But I learned through this patient to not only understand your demographic, but sometimes to keep your opinion to yourself. He was so ecstatic. He was so happy. He loves the way he looks. He came back and did his lower anteriors as well. So the moral of the story, don't allow your creativity and artistic talent to triumph your logic. And these are just some common mistakes I see very often and I'm messaged about as well. This one is shade selection. So single shade tabs, those on the left are from some doctors. All the dentists that work with me, I request, if possible, if they have time, of course, to send me something similar to the picture on the right there, the multiple shade tabs. It really helps me kind of calibrate and understand the difference, find that value, find that color. It helps my eyes understand, especially often the photos are very bright from the flash, right? So it kind of washes out the color. So it really helps when I have multiple shade tabs. I can also then turn it into a black and white photo. And through that grayscale, I can also identify the value. So you can see the shade tab on the left for that patient match the best from all of them. Even though I believe that third or fourth shade tab was what I thought I was going to use until I used grayscale and understood that those shades, those porcelain shades, would have been way too low value. So I ended up using the one on the left. If possible, if you go to the doctor or the doctor sends you photos, please request stump shades. Many doctors will send you, please use A1, but then you use A1 and they don't tell you that that tooth is root canaled or has a metal post or core. So you end up with one gray crown and one A1 crown. So stump shades are very, very important. And a good tool to have in your toolbox is a polarized filter. It really shows you value. It takes away any glare from the photos you take from the flash. It really shows also small details, like you can see here, crack lines and the calcification that you could not see from the original photo because of all that glare. So you're able to better match that single central with a polarized filter. Another common mistake is a lack of planning and record taking. So in this case, the same gentleman from a previous slide, I was doing these two restorations, and the first thing I did is I sat down and I planned out all of the stains before even starting. In order to use that logic, you have to actually sit down and plan what you're going to do instead of blindly going into every case. So this is the final result. It was pretty close. Obviously, every case, every technician is a perfectionist, and we're all going to see little mistakes. Take that knowledge, take those mistakes that you see, and improve your next case. Also, maps, not only mapping out intraoral, what you're going to do, but also in the lab. This is a full contour YZST zirconia that I stained with Accent Plus. Now this is, I believe, that same patient that had trauma there. So like I said, I took photos and made sure that should she get into any more scraps and she comes back for that other central or lateral, I will have at least some idea of what I did to achieve that result. and then that way I can replicate it a second time. So here we made it to our last lesson, lesson number 4. We're going to start with a quote. A flower does not think of competing with the flower next to it. It just blooms. So we're going to move on to social media. It's a very important aspect in my own growth. The lesson is, it is not logical to compare a stranger's highlight reel with your reality. So let's talk about Instagram for a second. Don't believe everything you see online. When you see a beautiful restoration, whether it's on a model or in the mouth, you don't know the lengths that the technician and the dentist went through to get that result. You don't know how many repreps there were. You don't know how much time the technician spent on that crown. He could have spent all week on that crown. You have no idea how many remakes there were, or how many adjustments were made, how much time was lost. All you see online is a beautiful result. And it's great to get inspiration from these beautiful results. But the issue I often see, and I get messages from friends and from my peers online all the time, that they see these master technicians and they compare themselves and they say to themselves, what's the point? What's the point of continuing to grow if I will never reach that status or that level? And I just wanted to kind of give you a reminder not to compare your reality with somebody's highlight reel, because let's be honest, we post the best of our work. I'm not posting every single like molar I do, a monolithic molar. I'm not posting an A1 crown that doesn't have, just a standard everyday crown that doesn't have all of those beautiful details. I am posting the best of my work. It is far and few between that I do such intricate work, because your everyday crown is going to be regular shade without any of the details that you see a lot of my posts and others' posts. You also don't know how much editing some people do. I'm not saying all, I'm saying that there are people who Photoshop their work or they lie in their captions, and there are regular technicians that just want to be the best that they can be, that are comparing themselves. And let me say, I am not immune to the effects of social media, because I am human, same as you. I found myself often in the beginning of my journey comparing my aesthetics to others. And let me say, you often also see beautiful crowns. You see that beautiful aesthetic, but you don't even know, did it fit in the mouth? Did the doctor spend an hour trimming it? Were the contacts open? Right? So always remember, when you're doing your own cases, compare yourself today to the person you were yesterday. Do not compare yourself to someone that you don't know what they went through to even get that result. And always remember that nobody cares how pretty your crown is if it doesn't fit. Function over aesthetic always, right? When you see that crown online, you'll see maybe it's a little shorter. Well, maybe that's because the excursions didn't allow it for it to be longer. Maybe it's missing some decalcification or some translucency. Well, knowing your demographic, maybe the patient didn't want decalcification on their crown. I've had patients with A3 teeth that are doing a single central and they request an A1 tooth. Why? Because they've always wanted white teeth. And if they're paying for a tooth to be replaced, might as well at least get closer to their goal. So with that being said, always, always focus on function over aesthetic and don't compare yourself. Instead, use others as inspiration, because the comparison is the thief of joy and inspiration is the fuel to your fire. So these are 5 pages that I highly recommend looking at. Obviously, the first one is my absolute favorite. Like I said, if there's any course that you're going to take, and from all the courses I've ever took, and I've taken a lot, Mariano Morizzi, I highly recommend if he's in your city. I would even travel, honestly. He's a wealth of information and he will change the way you look at cases. All of these pages are a wealth of knowledge. It's a source of knowledge, a wealth of knowledge. You can go and get inspiration for your own cases. You can use those crowns as a sample that you can do in the lab. It's a great source of practicing, and it will fuel your fire. Instead of comparing yourself to these people and putting them on a pedestal, use their work as inspiration to be better, and use your today, and make sure your today is better than your yesterday. With that being said, follow me. And please reach out to me with any questions, with any concerns. If you want those videos that I showed or that I showed in this slide, if there was any lag, just let me know. I will send them over. And any questions you have about anything that I spoke about, please feel free to message me, to reach out to me. I am always available. So thank you for listening, and thank you for making it to the end.
All right. Thank you very much, Danny. That was a greatly appreciated webinar. A lot of good information there. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and what you've learned over the years. So there's a lot of good anecdotes in that. Let me go ahead and wrap a few things up, and then we'll get to the questions and answers. So I'm going to make myself the presenter. All right, so just a couple things. CE, again, those of you that are asking questions about CE, we will send you the information on the CE and provide that to you. The workshop was recorded, so please visit us at the VITA North America YouTube channel and give us a couple of days and we'll have that posted. If you are in need of a VITA North America or a Canadian rep, here's our rep list that you can also review as well on the webinar. We do have some future webinars coming up along with the 2025 scheduling. Danny will be at the Chicago LMT in February. Thank you, Danny, for helping us out with that in February.
Of course.
So please visit us there if you can't catch her again on a webinar. And then now that we get to questions, so let's start off with a few questions here. So one of the questions is, do you have or do you mix stains with the porcelain ever, or do you use some of the color stains before you layer on top of it?
So when it comes to staining, I always stain before. I'll stain the zirconia core before I layer porcelain, for like 99% of my cases. It's like an internal bake. And when it comes to mixing porcelain with stains, you can do it 100%. I don't often do that because the internal stain I find is adequate. And I can also just build up with porcelain and do external staining as well. So that's my personal technique, though I know many master technicians that will do, that will stain or mix stains with porcelain. So it's really dealer's choice.
Okay, great. And then what staining brushes do you use?
So it was in the video as well. I use the Smileline number 0, number 1, or number 1 and number 3, I believe. Number 3 I use usually for glazing and for the texture and for any small adjustments. And then the number 1 I will use for staining. It's very, very thin. I do use some number 0s, but they're so thin and they break so easily on me. It's honestly not worth the investment. So 1 and 3, and I use the Smileline Respect line.
And talking about texture, one of the questions is how do you create texture using glaze?
So it was in the video, and what I do is I mix the glaze to a really, really thick, sticky, kind of honey-like consistency. I'll load the brush, and then I will kind of like I will put a ball of that glaze, that thick glaze, right in the middle, at the middle kind of gingival third, feather it upwards, and then I will create paracomata, or any sort of anatomy, the natural anatomy that the patient has. I will mimic it by making horizontal lines, by putting some glazed liquid on the ridges to make them smoother, and then some vertical texture. I will kind of stack it at the incisal third. So it's the same process you would do with porcelain, but you're just using a thicker glaze. So it's basically like you're stacking or micro layering. It's the same kind of motions and the same technique.
And when you do use the thicker glaze, do you adjust your firing cycle?
Nope.
Nope. Same free dry, same.
Yep, it's all the same. I mean, I never use enough glaze where I would need to put it up. I don't use such a thick not consistency, a thick layer. If I do need a thick layer, I will probably, like, if, for example, an adjustment in width or height is needed and there's a lot of adjustments to be made, then I will just do that in porcelain. So the texture, the glaze texture really should be a thin amount where you won't need to adjust your temperature.
Okay. Do you recommend mechanical polish, or do you recommend mechanical polishing after your glaze?
I don't usually do that. A lot of the time I will use a specific polishing wheel that actually makes the surface matte, because another thing that people ask me is that in the mouth, the crown that they make is like overly glazed and it's very shiny. So what I want to say is saliva is what should be making your crown shiny. You want your crown to be more matte. So I will do mechanical polishing, but I will use a specific wheel, and you guys can reach out to me. I will send you where to buy that wheel and what it's called. It's very like an obscure one. It took me forever to find, but it's a rubber wheel that will remove some of that high shine of that glaze, because you want the saliva to be your glaze, to be that shine. I will also sometimes, if the ridges are a little bit bumpy or some of that texture, that horizontal or vertical texture got onto the ridges, then I will use a wheel, like a high shine wheel, to smooth them out, and also along the margin. Any zirconia surfaces that touch tissue, I will also mechanically polish to a high polish, because tissue loves polished zirconia much more than it does glaze.
Glaze, yeah. All right, and then another question is on the glaze. What is the right consistency of glaze and stain?
The right consistency when it comes to stain, just make sure that it's not running. Every technician is different. Some like a more runny mixture, but then they run into the colors mixing together. So what I recommend is to mix it to the consistency that you're comfortable with, that you can layer and see that nothing is running, it's not too watery, it's not mixing. It should be a consistency where you can stack the color, where you can add to the color without it slumping. So I prefer a little bit of a harder kind of consistency, where it's a little bit more dry, because I find that what I can do is just wet my brush with some glaze liquid should I need it. But if it's mixed much too watery, there's really no way of drying it out except for leaving it open to the elements. So my only recommendation, there is no right texture. It's not a one size fits all, but my biggest recommendation is just to have a consistency that you can work with, that doesn't slump or run or mix together with your other stains.
All right. Last question here is on your halos, do you apply it to the incisal edge, on the incisal facial, or incisal lingual?
So it's a little bit different when I'm stacking porcelain or when I'm staining, but when I'm staining, I will apply it a little along the ledge, along the very edge of it, and also a little below it, right above that incisal window. So where I make the mamelons and where I have that incisal window, right above it, I will put that halo onto the facial surface or also along the incisal edge.
Excellent. Danny, that was a wonderful webinar, and I appreciate you coming on and helping us, provide good, concrete education on not just concepts, but how to do it, how to explore yourself and your own talents and things of that nature. Because everyone has it within them to do it. They just have to practice, like you said at the beginning. And so I want to thank you very much for providing us with your time and your excellent training today.
Of course, Jim. Thank you so much for having me and for giving me the opportunity and making education so accessible to everybody. So I'm very appreciative of that.
Well, we'd like to see you more. And like I mentioned earlier, Danny will certainly be at LMT Chicago next February. So please join us there. I want to thank all of the audience for joining us and attending today's webinar. We greatly appreciate your time and what you do for the market and for patients, if you will, ultimately. So we appreciate it. And again, you can follow up some of the webinars that are posted. They're going to be on the VITA North America YouTube channel if you need to visit us. So please do so. I want to thank everyone again. Danny, thank you again. And this will conclude today's webinar. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.